It is a real pleasure to be with you here this morning, everybody. Can I begin by also acknowledging that we're on the traditional lands of the Gardner people, and I respect their spiritual relationship with country and acknowledge elders past, present, emerging and future. Mickey, it's always a pleasure to be able to hear your welcome to country. I learn something new every single time. A couple of things that Mickey said in his opening sort of connected with me, and I'll touch on Aboriginal education a bit later. But one of the points that Mickey made was the need for us to ensure that we're always looking after people who don't necessarily have a voice, the people who need a bit of extra support. I always get a bit worried when I'm thinking about audience participation, but I'm going to go out on a limb. Can you put your hand up if you've read the Melbourne Declaration on Educational Achievement in the last, well, it's 11 years, I suppose, so any time in that period. So that's most people, and I think before I said any time in the last 11 years, about a third of the room had put up their hand. So I'm going to assume that's those who've read it quite recently. I hope you'll forgive me if I just quote from the preamble briefly. The Melbourne Declaration reads, "Improving educational outcomes for all young Australians is central to the nation's social and economic prosperity and will position young people to live fulfilling, productive and responsible lives. Young Australians are therefore placed at the centre of the Melbourne Declaration on educational goals. These goals are 1. Australian schooling promotes equity and excellence, and 2. All young Australians become successful learners, confident and creative individuals, active and informed citizens. Achieving these educational goals is the collective responsibility of governments, school sectors and individual schools, as well as parents and carers, young Australians, families, other education training providers, business and the broader community." I start there because I think Mickey's reminded us that it's important to consider first principles, especially at a meeting like this, where we're really setting the agenda for the year ahead, looking at the way that you'll be working in your preschools and schools and your sites, and the way that the head office might best support you and the government may best support you as well. Within that context, in the South Australian context, I think the core themes of that Melbourne Declaration are summarised by some words that the Chief Executive and I use variations of on a pretty regular basis. Our ambition is to see every child in every class, every preschool and every school in this state supported to fulfil their potential, given the opportunity to grow to their potential over the course of a year. That's our aspiration, and I'm sure that every single person in this room shares it. I know that you will contribute towards our goal of achieving it. So at this opportunity, I'd just like to start by thanking you for the work that you do, the work that you've done over your careers towards achieving that aspiration. The profound positive impact that you have on the lives of, frankly, in this room, not just thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people over the course of this year, and the lifelong impact that has for all of those people throughout their lives. People remember the things that happened to them at school, and even those that don't remember certainly benefit from the education they've received. The fact is that our public schools and our public preschools are wonderful places. They're places of safety and security, learning and achievement, of opportunity and of inspiration. But any endeavour worth doing in life is always worth looking for opportunities to improve the way that we're doing it. That's true in government, that's true in departments, that's true in schools and preschools, it's true in any endeavour worth doing. The Beatles, I like to use a pop culture reference occasionally, the Beatles didn't just stop at Rubber Soul, think we've done really, really well, we're the best band that's ever existed. They still had Revolver and Sgt. Pepper to go. And I think that that's always the way that I'd like to frame it. No matter how well you're doing, we can always look for ways to do better. And constant improvement really is a watchword, I think, for anyone who's achieving anything in life. Now, the advent of a new government can always lead to certain anxieties, and we've been in for about 10 or 11 months now. Anxieties about, or unease if you like, about the way that things may change. So I just want to put in context. The new government obviously has an agenda. We had a series of election commitments and a series of aspirations, but we are not seeking to make change for change's sake. Within that context, I want to start with the respect that we have for leaders and the work that you're doing in your classrooms, in your schools, and in the preschools. Your roles are complex, they're difficult, and they're demanding. And they are pivotal, absolutely pivotal to our agenda of improvement in our system. There is lots of outstanding work that has been going on and has been going on for a long period of time, long before changes of government. We want to celebrate that work. We want to support you in continuing that work. We want to listen to your advice. When the Chief Executive and I are visiting sites, it's not just a matter of showing our faces. We're there because we genuinely are interested in the points of view that we receive. And while we talk to teachers, we talk to early childhood educators, we talk to parents and students, it is often, of course, the leaders. Whenever we visit a site, there's always a discussion with the leader, and that's incredibly valuable. And we also want to help you achieve even more. There's a range of ways that happens, and some reforms, some work is led at the school level with school resources, and some is led at the system level with system resources. And I'll just run through a few of the things that we've been working on the last year, obviously. It was a pleasure to see a couple of people here from the Literacy Guarantee Unit. Literacy and numeracy are obviously foundational skills. But the Literacy Guarantee Unit has been working hard over the last 6 to 8 months since its establishment, and we're working with schools and with teachers to ensure that those people who need a bit of extra support and professional development opportunities are there. They've also been running conferences, and the first one I went to a few months ago, I think it was in the term 3-4 holidays, was at West Lakes, and they had this room of 250 people that was booked out and had a waiting list. So I think over the summer holidays they had a conference with 500, and I'm pretty sure they will continue to be popular. The STEM is obviously something that always gets talked about in educational settings. You know, that statistics, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, 75% of future jobs. You've all heard it, and those are important skills, but I think it's worthwhile saying in a venue like this that if we're seeking to ensure opportunities for every child to fulfil their potential, we can't forget the importance of the arts and the humanities, music, languages, those other things that may well be the supports, the curriculum that will ensure that that child is able to fulfil their potential as well. Before the election, the former government put in place a working group of Aboriginal educational leaders and experts, co-chaired by Professor Peter Buckskin and our Chief Executive, to work on our Aboriginal education strategy. And some money was put aside in the budget for that. Upon coming to government, this government doubled down and absolutely ensured that that work could continue. And it was a great pleasure late last year to be able to launch that Aboriginal education strategy. Now, this is going to be a confronting area on some sites, but one of the points that Peter Buskin made that I think spoke to me was we talk a lot about preparing our children for school, but it is also important that we prepare our schools for the children who are coming into them. And when we're talking about culture, ensuring that our staff who are potentially able to be very, very well versed and familiar with cultural sensitivities, but also those who aren't, are prepared for the way that they can best support all of our students coming in. And that's an important body of work, and there'll be a lot more said about that in the coming years. It's a 10-year strategy with very ambitious goals, but if we think about it, how can we have any less ambition for our Aboriginal students and our Aboriginal children in our settings than we can for every other child in our schools? And so we have 10-year strategy and 10-year goals, but also 3-year action plans. And there's a series of actions that are available in that. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I know you get a lot of emails, you get a lot of things to read, but it's not that long a booklet to read, and I encourage you to have a look at some of the work that is coming. In languages and music, again, strategies released last year. Languages, similar to the one released by the former government. Music was largely new work. The opportunities are there for individual teachers to enhance their professional development skills. There's scholarships and there are indeed grants to support work that schools are doing in languages. And in music, of course, there's an innovation fund, and there'll be a range of announcements in the period ahead on how that money will be applied to support the work you're doing in your sites, to see that every student in South Australia has some opportunity to have access to a great musical education. And in disability, I think that everyone in this room is probably as familiar as anyone in the state with some of the work that was done late last year on reforms to our disability funding model. I just make the point that our key goal was to ensure that the excellent workforce that we have in this area and support services are as much as possible spending more time supporting the needs of students rather than assessing those whom a principal or a site leader is able to make an assessment of if they need that low-level support. Hopefully this will help bring down the waiting list significantly for being able to get those assessments for those students that do need assessments, and I'll be interested in feedback over the coming months and indeed years as that new model rolls out. So feel free to send an email to me as the Minister anytime. I'm fairly sure you've got my contact details. This year we'll also be doing more work towards improving vocational educational pathways. We have a VET Innovation Award for schools that's been introduced to the South Australian Training Awards to recognise creativity, entrepreneurial thinking and those secondary schools that have developed innovative practices to enhance VET pathways for students. So please also have a look out for that, particularly if you're a secondary site. I think that's something that will be part of the government's broader initiative on improving an understanding of skills needs here in South Australia and the opportunities for more apprenticeships and traineeships, and now valuing of apprenticeships and traineeships as potentially a first choice pathway to a great career. It's worth noting that of the expected job needs in the future, obviously we all know that careers are changing and a set of capabilities is important for all of our young people who are going to be going into those careers, given that they may change career. But of the actual jobs that are in high demand, I think the statistic was 12 of the 15 highest demand jobs expected in the next 10 years are jobs that require skilled and technical qualifications. And I think that in light of ensuring our young people have a great understanding of the opportunities that are there for their future, lifting the profile of vocational education in those pathways is very important. I've probably spoken already too long, but I just want to briefly touch on infrastructure. All of our sites across South Australia should, by the middle of 2020, have access to fibre optic cable internet. This is an $80 million commitment working with Telstra to roll that out. My understanding from Scott Bayliss is that that's going extremely well and they're getting dozens of schools every term, and that is to speed up in the period ahead. Hopefully that will make your job easier in many ways. Infrastructure, last week we announced $180 million worth of new infrastructure. Now, a lot of that was obviously caught up in the Year 7 project, but I make the point, a significant amount of it was to meet the infrastructure needs of our system, as we have had an extraordinary growth, particularly in certain areas in public school enrolments. For a long period of time, the average enrolment in a reception across the system was 10 to 11,000 reception students. For the last 7 years, that figure has been between 13 and 14,000 per year, a growth of between 2,000 or 3,000 per year every year for the last 7 years in our system. And if that continues, and if those students stay in the public system, which we anticipate they will, then that means there'll be an extra 10,000 spaces, potentially more, needed in our high schools in the coming years. Irrespective of Year 7 coming in, there's a significant capacity issue in our schools, and we're now looking to use the research that's been done over the last year to address that. There are obviously going to be other schools that see themselves having capacity needs, and will be awake to that and open to considering that in the years ahead. The announcements last week will, however, ensure that our sites are set up not just with classrooms, but also with specialist learning areas, so that those students can get the support they need to succeed. Last Friday, the education ministers around Australia came together with stakeholders of a range of principal stakeholders. Indeed, secondary and primary principals were represented there, as were preschool directors, I recall, Early Childhood Australia. About 60 people in all came together in Melbourne to read that Melbourne Declaration, where I started my comments today. To talk about whether it needed to be rewritten or refreshed, there was a Hobart Declaration in 1989, there was an Adelaide Declaration in 1999, there was a Melbourne Declaration in 2008, and wondering whether it was time to modernise it. Now, the vibe in the room was largely that it didn't need so much to be changed or rewritten as refreshed. There were comments about the lack of acknowledgement of our first Australians throughout the document, people with disability and their needs. There was a clear oversight, I think, that was identified by many in the lack of identification of early childhood settings in addition to schools. When we say Australian schooling should promote equity and excellence, I think that we would rather say Australia's education system should promote equity and excellence. And the other point that I think was set up is that what does equity mean in that setting? And I think Goal 2 really talks to that. All the young Australians can become successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens. And that really is a reasonable summary of what we're striving for if we want to achieve equity. I think for mine, I'd add that we also want all of our students to be equipped to contribute to and to succeed in the modern world. Those discussions about what is a future Melbourne Declaration, or whatever it's going to be called next, what is that going to look like in the years ahead? That's a discussion that all jurisdictions are participating in over the coming years. As site leaders, people who may be interested in rereading the Declaration from time to time, we'd really value your input. So I encourage you, have a reread of the document. It holds up pretty well, but it's not perfect, and it too, like everything else we do, is an opportunity for continual improvement and enhancement of what we're seeking to achieve. So I encourage you to reread it and send us your thoughts over the next few months on any particular, I encourage you to keep it shortish, because I am going to read all of them, but any particular highlights, any particular reforms, any particular rewordings, any particular improvements, so that when we look at this foundational document, that all of our governments, all of our schooling systems, all of our preschooling systems across Australia look at when we're thinking about what is our core business, what are we here for, to ensure that when we make that declaration later this year or early next year, we do so informed by all of you. And it's a document that will again stand the test of time, or at least another 9 or 10 years. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm sorry for going over time, and I hope you have a wonderful conference.